Let's start by talking about designing an identity strategy. When you're developing a cloud identity solution, you have a number of options. You could, for example, keep all the identities in the cloud. In other words, just use your Azure AD exclusively for your authentication. But if you want to work with Azure AD in combination with your on-prem AD, you can use Azure AD password hash synchronization or Azure AD pass-through authentication, or you can use some fully federated solution. Password hash synchronization works like this. Azure AD Connect synchronizes a hash of the user's password from on-prem Active Directory to Azure AD. What this means is that the user can use the same password on-prem and in the cloud, and when they change it on-prem, it gets synchronized to the cloud. The actual password itself, of course, never gets replicated to the cloud. It's only a hash, but it's all Azure AD needs to authenticate the user. One benefit of this is that cloud authentication still works even if the on-prem links or servers go down. In pass-through authentication, the password actually stays on-prem entirely. Azure AD Connect passes the user's password hash through to the on-prem Active Directory for authentication, and so the user still uses the same password on-prem and in the cloud, but the password never leaves the premises. The password and its hash remains exclusively on-prem. This is good for security, but dependent on the availability of the on-prem resources. In other words, if the links go down or if on-prem Azure AD goes down, you can't authenticate to the cloud. So when you're determining the appropriate technology, some questions to ask include which identities need to be replicated to the cloud and how often do they need to be replicated to the cloud. Also, what properties of those identities do you want to replicate to the cloud? Of course, you're always going to replicate the user ID itself, but do you want to replicate additional things like phone number, office address, and so forth? And for the remainder of this lesson, we're going to talk about a couple of available solutions that you might use. Azure AD Connect, which runs as an on-prem service, and Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync, which is largely a cloud-managed service, though it still has lightweight on-premises agents. In this section, we'll discuss planning